Coco Chanel. There is a reason her name still appears on storefronts more than 50 years after her death. Gabrielle Bonheur Chanel grew up in an orphanage in rural France, and that background shaped everything she would later create. She learned to sew within those walls, not as a form of expression, but as survival. When she eventually opened a small hat shop in Paris in 1910, nobody expected much. But Chanel had something rare. She could see what women actually needed, not what society thought they should wear. At the time, women were dressed in corsets, heavy layers, and elaborate ornamentation. Chanel stripped all of that away. She borrowed from menswear. She used jersey fabric that was considered too casual for fashion, and she made simplicity look like power. The little black dress, the Chanel suit, the quilted handbag with a chain strap, each of these came from her instinct that women deserved comfort without sacrificing elegance. What made her truly influential was not just the clothes, but the idea behind them. She was designing freedom at a time when freedom for women was still being negotiated. Yves Saint Laurent. Few designers can be credited with genuinely changing how women move through the world, but Saint Laurent is one of them. Born in Algeria in 1936, he was a quiet and sensitive young man who found his way to Paris and at just 21 years old became the head designer at Christian Dior following Dior's sudden death. The pressure was enormous, and he handled it with a maturity that surprised everyone. But his real legacy began when he launched his own house in 1961. Saint Laurent looked at the cultural shifts happening around him, the civil rights movement, the rise of youth culture, the blurring of gender lines, and he responded directly. In 1966, he introduced Le Smoking, a tailored tuxedo suit designed for women. At the time, women in trousers were still unwelcome in many formal spaces. He did not see this as a provocation, he saw it as logic. He also drew from cultures outside Europe with a depth and attention that few of his contemporaries matched. His collections referenced Morocco, Russia, China, and sub-Saharan Africa, not as costume, but as genuine admiration. Saint Laurent made fashion feel like it was paying attention to the world. Alexander Mcqueen. His work made people uncomfortable, and that was entirely the point. Lee Alexander Mcqueen grew up in working-class East London, the youngest of 6 children, and found his way into fashion through a tailoring apprenticeship on Savile Row. He later studied at Central St. Martin's, where his graduate collection was bought in full by the stylist Isabella Blow, who became one of his most devoted champions. Mcqueen's shows were not presentations, they were confrontations. He explored themes of mortality, violence, trauma, romance, and the natural world with an intensity that no other designer touched. His spring 1995 collection, titled Highland Rape, drew on the history of English colonialism in Scotland. His 1999 show, Number 13, ended with a model standing on a rotating platform while robotic arms sprayed her with white dress with black and yellow paint. He was technically brilliant. His tailoring was considered some of the finest of his generation, but he used that skill in the service of something darker and more personal than most fashion allows. Mcqueen died in 2010, and the industry has spent the years since acknowledging that nothing has quite filled the space he left. Giorgio Armani. There is a particular kind of confidence that does not announce itself, and Armani built an empire around it. Born in 1934 in the small Italian town of Piacenza, Italy, he spent time studying medicine before drifting toward fashion and eventually landing a buying role at the Milan department store La Rinascente. He worked quietly for years before launching his own label in 1975. His timing was precise. The late 70s and 80s brought a new kind of professional, ambitious, educated, increasingly female, who needed clothing that communicated authority without looking like a costume. Armani gave them unstructured suits. He removed the padding, softened the shoulders, and let fabric move with the body rather than against it. When Richard Gere wore Armani throughout the 1980 film American Gigolo, the clothes became almost as talked about as the film itself. Hollywood took notice, and Armani became the quiet standard for dressed-up restraint. His approach never chased trends because it was built on the idea that real sophistication does not need to be loud. Decades later, that philosophy still reads as modern.
Vivienne Westwood. She came from outside the fashion system entirely, and she never really entered it on its own terms. Vivienne Westwood grew up in Derbyshire, England, trained as a teacher, and only found her way into clothing through her relationship with Malcolm McLaren, the manager of the Sex Pistols. Together, they ran a shop on the King's Road in London that became a gathering point for the early punk movement in the mid-70s. The clothes they made, ripped fabric, bondage straps, safety pins, slogans, were meant to disturb. But Westwood did not stay in punk. She moved into historical tailoring, into corsetry, into the kind of craftsmanship that seemed directly opposed to where she had started. The tension between those two poles, rebellion and tradition, became the defining quality of her work. She brought the bustle back. She reintroduced the corset as outerwear. She made clothes that looked like they were simultaneously falling apart and meticulously constructed. Later in her life, she became a vocal activist for environmental causes, wearing her politics as openly as her designs. Westwood never separated what she believed from what she made, and that consistency gave her work a weight that went beyond fashion. Rei Kawakubo. Most designers work within the idea of beauty. Kawakubo has spent her career questioning whether that idea is even the right place to start. Born in Tokyo in 1942, she studied fine arts and literature before teaching herself about clothing and founding Comme des Garçons in 1969. When she showed in Paris for the first time in 1981, the response was genuinely disorienting for many in the audience. The clothes were dark, deliberately unfinished, asymmetrical, torn in places. Critics called it post-Hiroshima, poverty fashion, a kind of anti-fashion. Kawakubo did not argue back. She continued. Over the following decades, she expanded the vocabulary of what clothing could express. Padding that distorted the body, garments with no clear front or back, collections that were more like installations than seasonal offerings. The Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art dedicated a solo exhibition to her in 2017, only the second time in its history that a living designer had been given that honor.